So over the weekend we had Otakon, which is a really cool gaming and anime slash cosplay convention, and there was also a few panels dedicated to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, including the voice actors and the developers of the game. So we got some cool bits of information from them, including some teases in regards to a revamped version of Queen's Blood that is going to be hitting Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. So if any of that sounds cool to you and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can like the video, subscribe, leave a comment, and smash the bell icon like it owes you Gil. Doing any one of those things helps me out so much, and it's always cool to hear from you guys. You know, I don't want this to just be a channel where I'm talking at you. I want you guys to actively get involved and leave your thoughts and opinions and have civil conversations with one another in the comments down below. I think it's always great when that happens, and again, all of the help is greatly appreciated. So before we get to the Final Fantasy news, very quickly, I do want to talk about the unfortunate news, which you've all probably heard by now, but after 30 plus years within the industry, unfortunately, Game Informer is going to be shutting down, which is really unfortunate. There's been so many layoffs in the past year plus in this industry. Game Informer, Microsoft, Sony, Bungie, and I believe there was layoffs recently at Intel as well. And it's just so frustrating to see all of these incredibly talented, hardworking people lose their jobs while the people at the top, the CEOs, spend a ridiculous amount of money on stuff and get paid insane amounts of money and seemingly never face any repercussions. It's just really frustrating to see that, and I hope one day that changes, and I hope that everyone that got laid off is able to land on their feet and find jobs elsewhere. And for me, Game Informer was such a massive part of my childhood because my mom would take me to GameStop on occasion, and one day she decided to say yes to the Game Informer subscription. And I believe at the time they included the previous month's issue for free just to kind of give you a preview of what the magazine would be. And every single day, I would come home from school and just hope and pray that on the floor would be the Game Informer magazine. I could not wait for the newest issue to arrive, and I would rip off the plastic, and from front to back multiple times, I would just read through that magazine, absorbing all of the gaming information that I possibly could. I would get hyped for new games that were announced. Their cover stories were also really incredible. And even to this day, Game Informer, provided us with some really great content and coverage in regards to Final Fantasy XVI and VII Rebirth. So they've been with me and a majority of people throughout most of our lives. And you can't forget a lot of their cover stories in magazines. Most recently, Rebirth and 16 got some beautiful covers, but one of the most iconic ones to me was from back in the day with Final Fantasy X. Getting information at that time about FF10 was really difficult because everything was overseas. So when us plebs here in America could get some sort of information or video or pictures on 10, it was a very big deal. So it's really sad to see this magazine go, but again, I just hope that everybody lands on their feet and ends up finding a good job or hopefully a better job. So getting to this Final Fantasy VII Otakon news, the first thing we will talk about is the teases they had for Queen's Blood in VII Remake Part 3. Now this comes to us from Neo Aoshi on Twitter, however it's being reposted by Genki, also on Twitter, and they go on to say, so right now we are preparing for a revamped, even better version of Queen's Blood for the next title, which is sick. The lead up to Rebirth, I was so excited about Queen's Blood. I purposely didn't look into the rules too much because I wanted to learn as I played, and then Rebirth came out and I played Queen's Blood and I was so lost. I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused. I did the tutorial multiple times and still couldn't figure out how to play the damn game. So I watched some tutorials on YouTube, finally learned how to play it. Keep in mind, I'm a bit of a slow learner when it comes to some of this stuff, so it does take me a while to really fully grasp the mechanics of some of these things. But once I did, there was no looking back, man. I couldn't wait to get to a new region. I would be like those gifs you see of rappers like rubbing their hands together, licking their lips, being like, yeah, what Queen's Blood player am I gonna demolish next? It was so much fun, super addictive. and I thought that it was actually pretty well balanced for the most part. I love the cards, I love the playing board, so I'm not really quite sure how they're going to revamp and change it for part 3. But they could take inspiration from, the Queen's Blood that we got at Costa del Sol and Gold Saucer, which kind of took the rules of Queen's Blood and turned them on their heads to change up the gameplay. So now you had different rules, you had more restrictions on what cards you could use or where you could place them, and it kind of became more of a puzzle game. So I'm not sure if they'll take those elements and weave them into the main Queen's Blood, but man, it was so much fun, and they did a really good job with the NPCs as well. All of the Queen's Blood NPCs you challenge are unique, have different personalities, and are pretty memorable. From facing an AI robot to a German Shepherd or a Chocobo that knows how to play Queen's Blood was super fun and exciting. I'm also hoping to see Fort Condor return, but not the version we saw in Rebirth. I much preferred the one we saw in Intermission. Having an ATB bar, seeing my opponent's ATB bar, I think is just a little bit more fun, felt a little bit more balanced. So here's hoping that they bring that game back as well. But of course, Queen's Blood, super excited. Can't wait to see more of it. And also let me know in the comments down below, what would you guys like to see them change or revamp about Queen's Blood in regards to maybe the cards or some of the rules? Up next, this is also from Neo Aoshi, and it was a question directed at John Eric Bentley. Now, before we get to the question, again, this panel featured Naoki Hamaguchi, Yoshinori Kitase, and Teruki Endo, as well as some of the Japanese and American voice actors. So on the American side, you had John Eric Bentley, Susie Young, Max Mittelman, Erica Lindbeck, Britt Barron, and Brianna White. Now, I'm not familiar with all of the Japanese voice actors, but I do know the characters they played. So the actors for Cait Sith, Yuffie, and Chadley were also in attendance. And what was really cute is that the voice actor for Chadley, he showed up wearing a Chadley-style lab coat in honor of Chadley, which I thought was super cute. So it was really like an all-star panel for Rebirth, which is super cool. And before I forget, they did also include Cid's voice actor, J. Michael Tatum, which is cool because I believe this is the first time he's done press for Rebirth, but I think it's also the first time he's been around the rest of the cast. So he got to chime in with some of his own bits of information that were great too. But the question that was directed at John was, how did he prepare for the Dine scene? Which of course, if you played the game, Barrett and Dine are the best of friends. Unfortunately, Dine ends up dying. And this was an incredibly heartbreaking, but also emotional and beautiful part of the panel where John Eric Bentley starts to talk about the actor's process of preparing for that scene and all of the different things you can do as an actor. You can either go method or do sense memory, which is what he did, where you take elements of your actual life and just kind of relive them to prepare you for those emotions of, what your scene is going to be. And what prepared him for losing Dine was the actual loss of his father in real life, which I'm getting choked up because again, I lost my dog back in June and it's been so weird not having her, and just feeling all of those emotions of losing someone you love so much can be hard to get through and process. And John used those moments with his father to shape his performance with Dine, and he got incredibly emotional. He had to pause a few times to take a break so he could get his words out. And he said above everything, not just with that scene, he wanted to do justice to Barrett and made sure that he was a character and not a caricature, because he wanted to pay tribute to Yoshinori Kitase and the development team that made the original FF7. And everyone in that theater was just crying and clapping and cheering everyone else on, and it was such a beautiful moment. John Eric Bentley absolutely did a fantastic job in Rebirth, period, but also that scene with Dine is just so heartbreaking to watch over again, and he nailed it. Up next, this one comes to us from Nominee's friend on Twitter, which I'm pretty sure is a Kingdom Hearts reference. They go on to talk about J. Michael Tatum and his inspiration for the character of Cid, in particular, his voice, where he reveals that Cid's voice is basically just his father's voice. Michael Tatum is from Texas. His father is like a thick accented Texan man, and he said that before he auditioned for Cid, and even before his callbacks for Cid, he would call his father and just have conversations with him to analyze his dad's voice so he could nail it for the character of Cid, which I thought was just like super endearing. And to see the cast be so open and talk about their families and the inspiration they provided for these characters is great, and I really can't wait to see more of Cid. I personally liked what we got from Cid in Rebirth. I know there was a lot of people who weren't happy. They felt like, Cid was watered down, he was changed way too much, but I think that's all part of the story. Again, again, we meet Cid late in Rebirth. The party doesn't really know him and he doesn't know them, so obviously he's not going to open up right away. The furthest he goes is recognizing Aerith and letting her know that he knew her mother, but we're not going to actually see the real Cid until we get to Rocket Town in part 3. And again, I don't think they should make him quite like he was in the OG, where he was very abusive verbally and sometimes physically. I think they can tone some of that stuff down and still get their point across to all of the emotions that Cid is feeling, the anger, the resentment, the frustration. So I still expect him to cuss every once in a while, but I don't think you need to do it all the time. And in fact, I think when you're kind of working with some restrictions on what you can say and do, I think that forces the writers and the developers to be a little bit more creative with how they present a certain character like Cid. But I thought that J. Michael Tatum did a fantastic job. I loved his voice. I loved that Texas twang that he added to Cid. And I can't wait to see more of Cid, especially in combat. How is he going to operate? Is he going to be kind of Sonon-ish? Is he going to be completely unique? I'm just super excited to see that, and also his synergy abilities with the party. Also from Nominee's friend, this was a question aimed at Britt Baron, who is the voice actress for Tifa, where she kind of goes a little bit more in depth with the character of Tifa, and she mentions that there is always a river of subtext for what Tifa says in the game. And again, everyone in this cast is phenomenal. But Britt Baron, I kind of have a special place in my heart for her because she just is so emphatically Tifa. Not even just how she looks in real life. And most of the people on this cast honestly look eerily similar to their characters, to where you could give them the character outfits and everyone would kind of resemble their in-game counterparts. It's pretty nuts. But I love that she says this because she so clearly understands Tifa on a deep level. And that's who Tifa is. She's kind of I think I described her as walk softly, carry a big stick. Tifa's so incredibly kind. She's the mother of the group. But there are times where she's a little unsure of herself and she doesn't know how to, express herself or even ask for help. And I think one of the greatest moments in Rebirth is when you first enter the Mithril Mines and we see some of the black-robed men fall through the cave floor, and Tifa is clearly very worried about them. And she says something along the lines of, man, I hope they're okay. But underneath the I hope they're okay is all of this, again, river of subtext of, oh my God, we need to check on these people. I hope they're not hurt. What were they doing here? What can we do to help? And a character like Barrett, who is very much in tune with those feelings, immediately picks up on it and says, you know what? You stay here, Tifa, I'll go and check on them so you don't have to do it. And that's just such a beautiful, character moment between those characters. But again, there's so much that Tifa says without saying it. The emotions on her face, the inflection in her voice. Again, it's that river of subtext which is so vital to a character like Tifa, because there's so much going on underneath that exterior that she sometimes, struggles with. Up next, the developers talk about the piano minigame, and this comes to us from Gene Park, who I believe works for the Washington Post. We've covered him a few times here on the channel. He's been heavily involved within the gaming industry as well. He's a bit of a veteran, you could say. He goes on to say the piano minigame of FF7 Rebirth was inspired by the guitar minigame of The Last of Us Part 2, where it was robust enough it worked as a real instrument. So those of you who haven't played The Last of Us Part 2, you're lucky. You have not been scarred by experiencing that incredibly dark, depressing story. But in that game, there's a few sections where the main character of Ellie can pick up a guitar and play it for real. And it's the actual chords of a guitar that you can play. And they guide you through it to play some pre-scripted songs, but there's also a free mode on that guitar, which has led to hundreds of thousands of people posting their own covers on YouTube of Ellie playing whatever song on the guitar, and it sounds great. It's that accurate. So I think a lot of us saw that inspiration for the piano game in FF7 Rebirth because it's the exact same thing except for piano. You've got your pre-scripted songs that you can play along to, but there are so many talented people out there that took the free mode of the piano and just started playing these different songs and creating their own songs and doing covers, and it's just so incredibly awesome to see that happen and to see how creative people can be with a piano minigame of all things. It's super cool. And I think the piano minigame, other than Queen's Blood, was probably my second favorite minigame in Rebirth. I just loved playing a new song every time I got it. I loved the, coordination required to use both of your thumbs and both thumbsticks to properly nail the timing on all the notes. It was just so much fun. So I hope that's actually a minigame that does return in part 3. It was a blast. Up next, this was from the developer side of the panel, where Yoshinori Kitase talks a little bit about the ending of Rebirth and teasing some of the Aerith stuff. So this comes to us from Eris Gainsborough 3 on Twitter, where they go on to say, Kitase at Otakon, Rebirth culminated with Aerith's fate. Fans have many perceptions on what this means. Probably lots of opinions in this room. Would you like to hear what it is? Please wait a few years, we're working hard. Which, oh, that's so painful. We have to wait still like at least 3 years before part 3 comes out and we get definitive answers. Again, during some of the previous interviews we've covered, we will get answers, thankfully. Nojima-san has promised that they will tie everything up nicely, but man, it just hurts to know that we have to wait that long. And again, we've spoken ad nauseum on this channel. Other people have done the same thing about what the heck is going on with Aerith. Multiple versions of Aerith. Which version are we seeing? Is that a Genova clone Aerith at the end of Rebirth that's just kind of messing with Cloud's mind? But the fact that the developers are so in tune with what we're experiencing and a lot of our thoughts and opinions does, again, reassure me that they will hopefully nail the landing on Remake Part 3 when it comes to all of this stuff. Also from Eris Gainsborough 3, they asked Hamaguchi-san, Kitase-san, and Endo-san what their favorite character combinations were. Hamaguchi says that his favorite was Barret in Red 13. Endo is Cloud and Barret because their synergy attack was actually the first one he made. And Kitase says Aerith and Tifa, and also Cloud and Zack. Now in terms of characters and interactions, I love Barret in Red 13. You saw it at the very end of 7 Remake, but they gave off heavy buddy cop comedy vibes, and we see that expand even more in Rebirth. And you know, when you first get to Cosmo Canyon and Red 13 reveals his Nanaki self, and it just completely blindsides Barret and he's like, what the heck is going on? Have you been lying to us? But then at the end of that chapter, when you're going through the Cave of the Gi, that bonds Red 13 and Barret, because now they're in this trial where they have to work together and trust one another, even though they're not quite, you know, super friendly with one another at this point. You know, the very childlike mind of Nanaki comes out when Bugenhagen says, yeah, Barret will do, he's gonna go with you. And Nanaki's like, him? Couldn't you pick anybody else? It's just a really cute dynamic. And then in regards to synergy attacks, Cloud and Zack getting a synergy attack, technically 2 of them. Cloud gets one with Zack, and then Zack gets one with Cloud, was super sick. And it's one of those things that if you're not careful, you can miss, including stuff like Zack's Limit Break. So it's always cool to see, you know, what the developers really like and what are some of their favorite combinations of characters. Now, speaking of favorite characters and least favorite characters, this was so sad to read. This comes to us from Rogue of Light TV on Twitter, where they go on to say they just polled the audience on what their favorite character was to play as in Rebirth at the developers panel at Otakon, and when they said Cait Sith, literally no one cheered and everyone laughed. Rogue also follows up by saying, for real, crying emoji, Endo. The battle director later was asked what was the easiest and hardest character to make, and he was like, well, Cait Sith. The groans made me sad because I spent so much time on it. I feel so bad for Endo. He put so much love and care into that battle system, and again, for those of you who missed our developer deep dive on Rebirth, Endo came into the project 7 Remake halfway through its development process, and in 6 months created one of my favorite combat systems in all of gaming. That's how talented this guy is. So they clearly put a ton of work into the characters on their own, but also as how they work as a team. And Cait Sith is a character where, you know, he's kind of hard to wrap your head around in Rebirth because he's got so many different mechanics. There's the singular cat portion of Cait Sith. There's the standalone Moogle that can act on its own. Then there's the combination of the two. And then you've got like the dice roll abilities from Cait Sith, which are kind of random as well. Well, they're not kind of random, they are random. But then he's also got some really OP abilities, like the ability to bring out a summon onto the battlefield without actually summoning them. And the basic attacks, all of that stuff, it is really hard to wrap your head around. And again, we get Cait Sith very late into the game, so you don't really have too much time to really sit down and get acclimated to him. But once I started to kind of learn how he played and his abilities, I started to get way more comfortable with him, and I actually kind of enjoyed his combat style. Although I will say the Cait Sith portion with the box throwing was super frustrating because A, the box throwing was not great. That was super longer than it needed to be. And the mechanics they used for throwing the boxes just didn't feel very intuitive. And you just needed to keep that simple. You don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to throwing boxes. And on top of that, Cait Sith is a character that I think in Rebirth, based on how he was designed, he really does need 2 other people with him, or at least 1 other person. It's kind of hard to win a battle against multiple enemies with just Cait Sith. Even though he has the Moogle by his side, some of his mechanics can be, again, a little tricky to wrap your head around. But based on feedback, I'm sure that they can revamp Cait Sith in Part 3, maybe make him a little bit easier to use, make his abilities a little bit easier to understand, and maybe just make him buffer overall. But it'll be interesting to see how they change not only Cait Sith, but Red 13. Red 13 was the first time we got to play him was in Rebirth, so obviously there's going to be a lot of feedback people have on these characters that they're going to want to take into account for Part 3. So I'm curious to see how they change Red 13 as well, but also again, Vincent and Cid, because Vincent and Cid are going to be brand new and there's not going to be a second chance to revamp those characters for a new game. It's going to be quite the challenge for the team, but I think they're up to the task. And this last tweet I will leave you guys with, it has nothing to do with Otakon, but I will say that when you're browsing Twitter, specifically Final Fantasy VII stuff on Twitter, you come across some really strange things. You also come across a lot of like nudie photos of Tifa, which I'm not complaining about, but there's some weird stuff on there. So this comes to us from Eyes on B, where they say, I just watched a documentary on a girl who used to astral project to, quote unquote, make love to Sephiroth. So I feel immune to all opinions on FF7 now. So I figured I had to see that. Maybe you guys should see it too. There's some weird stuff on Twitter, so just be careful when you're browsing, dodge some minds. You gotta dodge the weird stuff, and then you gotta dodge all of the shippers that are actively duking it out with one another over some of the silliest things. Maybe just avoid all that stuff and, enjoy some porn-a-rooney from some time to time. With that being said, that is the video. It's kind of long, my apologies, but there was some cool information that came out from this Otakon convention that I thought was worth talking about. But let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about anything that we discussed in today's video? Drop those in the comments. I will see you guys in the next one. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.